Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and we are back with another Christopher Nolan film review. We did Dark Knight, and you might think, well, you know, we've sort of opened with the big main headliner, but no, we have Inception today, equally, if not better, in my opinion, than the Dark Knight. And we're going to go all into it today with our in-depth review. We've got a lot to cover in this one. I don't know how long it's going to go on for. We've the running time of these reviews is steadily increasing, isn't it, as we're going through them, which is to be expected. There's a lot to talk about with it. But this is one that we haven't really talked massively about in the channel's history, I don't think. We've talked about it, obviously, countless times in person and on our private chats and everything like that, but it's going to be really good to get a video done for this. Not least of the fact that it's celebrating its 10-year anniversary as well. It's currently in cinemas, at least in the UK. I think it's probably nationwide if your cinema's open. And I can't believe it's been 10 years. I'm just going to say this for all the films, but it makes me feel very, very old.
Yeah, I don't have the age effect, but we'll get into that. But with this film, you've had Dark Knight, and then what comes next? It's Inception. I agree, as you mentioned, is it equal or is it better? That's the general.
2 years after the Dark Knight. And that's mad.
It's the fact that it's not the fact it's even 2 years after. It's like a $200 million film about dreams that no one could ever imagine putting together, and it came out 2 years after. Yeah, you know, most films have like a 3-4 year gap when you've got instances like this, but no, this was ready to go. This was primed. Which obviously we'll get into more detail, but it's truly special. As we usually do, we're going to go into some of the intro stuff. So do comment below. Obviously, we're not live. This is pre-recorded, but we do have the chat at the side. So do comment your thoughts on Inception. Is it your favorite Nolan film? Do you have favorite scenes? We're going to go into some of them scenes, but as Chris mentioned, some of our videos have got longer. We are on, I want to say, the home stretch now, but it's the kind of that Dark Knight Inception back to back. That is probably the biggest talking points. And if you are watching, if this is your first Nolan video with us, we're in Christopher Nolan month, as you can tell above. We are reviewing every single one of his films. We're now at Inception. If you've not seen any of us, do check them out. We've got a playlist on the front of our channel, which has been pretty great. Obviously, we started at following. We've worked our way up into Inception. You're going to have a quick look at the schedule. All you need to know is that Dark Knight Rises is this Monday, the 17th. Inside the channel, if you've been watching, you will have got the hints that we have very different opinions on this film. I think we've both been looking forward to the Dark Knight Rises review as much as probably Inception and Dark Knight for different reasons. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, on Thursday this week, we'll have our Cinema Savvy Christopher Nolan quiz, which we will get more details about as the week goes on. And of course, for you guys in the UK and most of the world, except America, you can now book your Tenet tickets. They are on sale. They are absolutely flying. I keep checking screenings. They're going and going. So do get them. If you don't want to go to cinemas, they're even showing it at drive-ins, which is incredible. New released film at a drive-in, which is piracy and all that stuff. I couldn't imagine watching a Nolan film through my car radio. I've got okay speakers, but it's not a cinema. So everyone's got their own taste, but you can watch it if you don't want to go to a cinema.
Well, let's get the Imax out of the way first, and then we'll get on to possibly doing a drive-in. I've never actually done a drive-in, but that's really cool that they're doing it for Tenet. I didn't know they were doing it for that. Inception, Jesus. Okay, I guess first time watching it, right? Is this where we're going to start off? So 10 years ago, Jesus Christ. Okay, I think I did this on a double cinema day with Toy Story 3. I did Toy Story 3 first. Very, very sad. Kept all the motions contained, and then I followed it up with a mind-bending science fiction action epic by Christopher Nolan, and it was great. That was a good day at the cinema. 2 fantastic films, 2 probably the best of 2010. I guess this is spoiler alert for our videos that we did of our top 25 films of the 2010s. This was my number 1 pick. I think it was yours as well, or it was certainly up there towards the top. This film was amazing. So the trailers came out, and they were obviously very cryptic, as Tenet's trailers are, really. I think if we're going to compare it to any, like, we haven't seen the film yet, but in terms of visuals and what it looks like in terms of its themes, it does look like it's more in line with Inception, kind of what it's going for, that kind of heist-looking style of it. But the trailers came out, and it explained nothing. It gave you the concept. You knew that they were trying... involved dreams. There were cities folding on themselves. There were trains going through streets and corridor spins. That was it. So, and it was really refreshing at the time as well, because, you know, we've seen this increase as films have gone on throughout the years now. You get so many trailers for things. You basically feel like you've seen the film before you've even sat down for it. But this was really refreshing in that a trailer doesn't spoil the whole movie or doesn't tell you everything about it. You go in, you sit down, and you're just absolutely blown away by it. And I think we've said this before, and it may come across as a little bit snobby, but I understood it. I did understand it on first watching, but I can understand some people. There is a lot of information in this film. I'd say probably 3/4 of the film is basically exposition. Even all the way up towards the end of the film, they're still kind of explaining the rules, what can happen, and as you're absorbed into this world. And it all came from the mind of, is it one man? Is this just Christopher Nolan on this one? Or
just Nolan for this, yeah.
It's just him. Wow. Yeah, and we'll go into the history as well of how like the idea came about, because it shouldn't be a surprise now because we've done all these reviews and you find out that he had the idea for this like way back when. You think that I mentioned this, I can't remember which review I mentioned. You think that it's a sequential thing with movie making, like you get that film done, you move on to the next, you come up with the idea for it, you make the next. And no, this guy's just had ideas everywhere in his head like the whole time. But I loved it on first viewing. We'll get to the ending, but that will always stick in my head as one of the time. The entire audience, it was a big crowd as well, just gasped in exasperation and kind of like, oh, come on. Like, we wanted to know the ending, but that's perfect. It's so great that it was able to capture that and get that rise out of people as well. This was a film that had many multiple viewings from me. I can't remember how many times I went to see it around the time that it came out. And whilst not clearing the billion mark, I think that definitely helped with the star power of it being a Batman film with The Dark Knight, the film preceding this one. It got very bloody close, though. On a 160 mil budget, it got 830 mil. For a film around the time the 3D kick, this didn't do anything in 3D. It wasn't converted or anything like that. It is just an original concept as well. It's not a sequel. It's not a remake. It's not a reboot. It's an original film by Christopher Nolan, no gimmicks, and it makes that much. So it definitely hit the right crowd.
Before I go in with my first thing, you've brought in a beautiful point, because I was doing a bit of studying for this week. This is the third highest grossing original film of the 2010s.
Jesus.
And it came out in July 2010 without 3D, without anything. The first two, Inside Out, which made 29 million more, and Frozen, which obviously made way past $1 billion.
Yeah.
Obviously they are both original, but in the sense they're franchises in regards to Pixar and Disney. But that has always
been animated family films as well.
Yeah.
Good for all ages, isn't it? So,
and yet you've got Let's Go Into One Crazy Man's Mind. And I thought that's really worth bringing up, because we do go on about original films and the fact that, July 2010, and there's not been, even to this day, even last year, there's not been an original film that's grossed past that. So I guess you could, if you really want to get them weird stats going, you can say the highest grossing live action original film of the 2010s. Obviously, Avatar the year before technically has the record, but oh well. No, my first thing is very different to yours, because this was at an interesting point in my life. Obviously, I mentioned Dark Knight review that kickstarted me getting into film. I wasn't at a point where I knew like all directors and stuff. The first Oscar I watched was 2011 after this. And this film, I remember coming out of the cinema, it was the World Cup 2010. I was on holiday on a school trip, and I had this really sound maths teacher who was into his films, and he used to let me read Empire magazine. And I remember trailers coming on the halftime during the World Cup final, and this guy was like, "That's the film I want to watch. It's the guy that did Dark Knight." Blah blah blah. I didn't have a clue what was going on. I just remember the song. It's worth bringing up. The song of all the trailers is called Mind Heist, and I found that recently. It was actually created just for this film. It wasn't an original 20 years ago song being reused. It was composed just for these trailers.
And there are a lot of remarkable themes in it, aren't they? The final score as well. I mean, it's the film that gave us the proverbial boom, which has become a meme, which is, I want to say, still being used in film trailers to this day, 10 years on. It doesn't look like it's going anywhere. It has become a bit of a cliche, but I want to say it was started with this film, really. Absolutely, and it is, the Zimmer boom. It is important to this, and I didn't get to watch this film at the cinema. I think the story. It was summer. Obviously, I'm only just turned 14. I don't have a job or anything because you can't work at that age, and I obviously watched Toy Story a couple of times at the cinema. Came out, I think, within a week of each other. Yeah. And I was meant to go with my family. We were going to go to the Birmingham IMAX. I'd never been to an IMAX at this point. I've mentioned that before. Tron Legacy was the first IMAX screen, but I'd never been. This film, everyone spoke about IMAX, and we were going to go as a family. It was summer holidays, and then my sister came down, goes to my parents. Loads of my friends have watched this film. No one understands it. It's not worth going. So we ended up having to go to the zoo for the day.
And I didn't get to watch this until the DVD came out. I got it as a Christmas present, not even Blu-ray. Sorry, I'm not that kind of snobby child. I then didn't even get to watch it till I was ill. When I watched Blade Runner for the first time, I think I told you before that I was ill off school, so I didn't know if I didn't get it or if I was ill. Inception was the same. I was ill off school. My friend's like, you have to watch this film now. You really need to. You've got a whole day to yourself. I was like, okay, I'll do it. And I fell in love with it straight away. I got it. I think it's worth bringing up. Doesn't make us sound smarter. Some people get it, some don't. Got it on the first viewing, but it's deciphering it that comes with more viewings and viewings. Yep. But the concept, the structure, everything was absolutely fine. But it's more when you see the discourse online, and obviously you understand other people took longer. And as you're right, it's a lot of exposition. So this had a pretty big impact because, as I said, it's number one of my film of the 2010s. Obviously, I ended up buying it on Blu-ray, then I bought the briefcase edition, then I bought it on 4K, and I didn't get the satisfaction until this week of saying I finally saw it at cinema. I was there opening night for the 10th anniversary re-release. Very, very, I don't want to say proud moment, but it was a checklist. Like, thank God I can now tell people I finally saw this at cinema, albeit 10 years late. And they say if anyone's going to anniversary, there's a Nolan behind-the-scenes Inception video. And he said, I'm able to show this film for a new generation of people that couldn't see it. I'm kind of there like, yeah, me. But it is worth seeking out. But so I've had a very interesting history with this because it's just remarkable. And you know what? We all talk about the big screen experience. Of course, it has that. But you can watch this and understand this at home. That is always an integral thing to say. But obviously, like to rewind the clocks 10 years, then obviously that would have been a great summer day watching that in IMAX. But that had been my first ever IMAX film. That would have been incredible. Mm-hmm. But alas, it wasn't to be. But
well, interestingly, it wasn't shot on IMAX though, was it? This film?
That's what I thought.
Dark Knight, he shot the opening prologue in IMAX. It was the technology was probably there for years, but like definitely in terms of filmmaking, it seemed like it was very new around that time of the Dark Knight, especially filming sort of big expansive sequences like that. And he loves the format. Obviously, everything that he films in now is pretty much IMAX. He's fell in love with. He really, he's a proponent of that technology and what you can do with IMAX. But just in terms of what he wanted and the limits of what he wanted to do with this film, he didn't think, and the cameras at that point as well were huge. I've only got to imagine now they've become, as with most technologies, when they start out, they're these huge, massive things. It's probably shrunk down now and a lot more manageable in terms of films.
They're still humongous, but you can, I think Interstellar was the first film where they did a handheld IMAX, which is, you say handheld, but it's like carrying, like a humongous concert subwoofer still. But it is worth mentioning because I didn't know that until this week. That it wasn't shot on IMAX. I know on the Blu-rays for Dark Knight, Rises, etc., they do the IMAX, the crop. And I was reading, obviously, at the cinema. I was like, there's no IMAX shots, but it didn't matter. You had the sound, you had the visuals, and I think Nolan's gone on record to say in interviews as well that it was intentionally not shot on IMAX because of the world building he wanted to do. And I think this one more than the others, it would have affected me if you had the cropping happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, it's the dream world to keep it all as one, because I think it does take me out on the Dark Knight only on the Lamborghini bit when it cuts back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Certainly on the Blu-rays, and I think it was a solid choice for Inception. Obviously, Rises, you get a lot more. Interstellar onwards, it's pretty much there. But I think it was an interesting technique not to shoot this one on IMAX, but he still showed it in IMAX theaters. He had the sound design for it, everything else, and it's just absolutely incredible.
Well, nothing will be as bad as Transformers: The Last Night, will it, in terms of the constant cropping every few seconds? But let's not bring Transformers into this. Let's keep it on some actually good movies. So I guess we need to go into the plot for this thing. A lot of people have probably already seen the film, but this is according to IMDb. A thief who steals corporate secrets through the use of dream-sharing technology is given the inverse task of planting an idea into the mind of a CEO. On paper, it doesn't sound like the concept sounds interesting, but in terms of the actual plot, it is very basic. And this probably more so in terms of the cast and the characters. I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I was actually going to bring up one criticism of this film, and then I was reading more about the film and the genre of like a heist film as a whole, in that you are dealing with a huge ensemble cast with this thing. And I was going to say that it is kind of, apart from Cobb, it's very light on character. We don't really get to know the ins and outs of everyone, their motives for joining the job and everything like that. They all kind of have key roles, key abilities in the dream, and they serve those functions and they don't deviate from those functions, essentially. And I was going to bring that up as a minor complaint. I love this film, but in terms of that we do get so much characterization for Cobb, and then the others are just kind of, you might struggle to remember their names, for example, after a while, and you only really have those traits to connect to. But hearing Nolan talk about it, he was saying that heist films and sort of espionage films of this kind of style, they are very light on character. They are a lot of exposition, and people do fit into key roles, and that's where they stay, essentially. And with the size of the cast, I can understand focusing in, and he did want to dial up the emotional connection specifically to the main character of Cobb, the whole backstory with his wife and everything through non-linear storytelling and flashbacks. I think if they'd have gone overboard and tried to do it for everyone on reflection now, it's already a very long film, so it probably would have just been baggage and you don't really need it, and I don't know how much that would have served the plot. I think when you get to the ending, though, it would have been nice to have a little bit more for some characters, but I can understand condensing it down and just focusing it on the main character.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think with ensemble films, you're doing the same. People talk about like fairy tales, that traditional Star Wars scope of hero, villain, mentor, comedy duo. Yeah. It kind of ticks all them, but the only one, maybe Ellen Page, you get a tiny bit, but that's more because they hire her. But the key of this film is Cobb. We'll get into him properly, and I think it was a very big draw for Leo to take this role. As we know, he is a very specific actor. He doesn't take films for the sake of taking films. After Titanic, this is his highest-grossing film, which is remarkable. But I think that's a big thing, is that they fit these. They kind of, not anyone could play them, because that sounds a bit cruel. I don't think anyone could have played any of these roles, but you can tell there's not as much input into them. But I think you're spot on with that the focus of this is Cobb, and I think if you'd have got a backstory to each of the others, you'd have been adding another half hour on. Yeah. Which obviously would have been perfect in an ideal world. You know, let's even have the $300 million Inception TV series across 10 episodes. But ultimately, for the film, I think corners, I don't want to say corners were cut. You get hints, don't you, that, you know, a couple of characters will make comments. Obviously, they've worked with each other in the past, not too fond of each other. It's the sort of playground banter type thing. And I think you get a gist of where they are, but I think for plot story, really, it's just Leo and maybe Cillian Murphy that get the development in this, which I don't mind. And as a heist one, I haven't even thought of that. I'm glad you brought it, because you don't really get too many developments in heist. It's normally like a lead character. I always go back to Heat. It's not really a heist film. It's obviously it's more of a crime thriller. But
yes, you've got Ocean's 11 maybe as well. You could throw in there.
Yeah,
in the heist film.
Ant-Man to a degree. You've got the lead. I know that's a more modern, different take, but the heist genre, very quickly, was talking about the plot. It's a criminally underused genre, I think, in this day and age. I think it's so easy for people to confuse heist with crime. I think they're two very different things, but it's harder to pull off a heist film. We've got Baby Driver, which ventures into it, I guess. But I think it's a tough genre to pull off, but also it doesn't have the audience. You don't really, I mean, a lot of people love them, but you don't have people going, oh, my favorite genre is a heist film. And it's kind of like, we don't really have them. And whether it's they're harder to make than people think, or to write, or to get the funding for. But the fact that this all takes place in the mind it adds another dimension to this. And I think this has set standards for the years to come of anyone trying to do a heist film, because, as so simply put, the concept of the film is to steal an idea from a CEO. Corporate espionage.
Well, no, it's to plant an idea.
Sorry, to plant, of course, no, my bad.
But I think that's where, and you mentioned that it doesn't have the audience. I think when you have a heist movie or any kind of film like that, like a story about thieves, the plots are always very similar. It's either steal money, or steal a thing, or doing something to clear someone's name. And yes, you do have that element of, clearing his record and everything. But I think what makes this one unique is the concept itself of involving dreams and planting an idea rather than physically stealing like a tangible object, because that's a dime a dozen, and Christopher Nolan doesn't do dime a dozen, does he? He's always got to go one step beyond, or however many steps beyond with this thing, because this film is dense, to quote that thing. There is so much going on in it. There absolutely really is all the way through this thing. I don't want to go too much into this now, because I might save this for Nolanisms, but I guess we can talk about when he originally had the idea for this thing. So I've seen two things. It's either 2001, 2002 kind of time, right around the time of finishing work on Insomnia. He had the idea for this thing. I think he had an 80-page treatment for this thing. I think he even went so far as to took it to Warner Brothers. And I've got to give Christopher Nolan credit for this thing, because imagine having this idea all the way back then. Never really been done before. and he realized his ability at that point wasn't up to scratch. I mean, he was a fantastic director, but he didn't have the experience to pull off what he wanted to do with this film. And I really respect him in that he shelved the project. You know, he shelved the script. I think he was constantly working on it over the course of the 10 years. But I know, obviously, before the film was coming out, he really just reworked the whole thing, I think, in the 6 months before they started shooting. I know when he got Leonardo DiCaprio, those two spent months going through it together, understanding the character and the premise of the story and everything like that. But imagine shelving this idea for a decade and just going, I really hope no one comes up with this idea in the next 10 years, otherwise it's all undone. But I've got to give him that respect. You know, he wanted to get some bigger films under his belt. He went and he made Batman Begins, The Prestige. Again, that was kind of a smaller film. He did The Dark Knight. I've got my experience with my big films. Finally, now I can do what I envisioned way back when.
I think that's worth bringing up because we'll have a similar conversation in Dunkirk where he said the same things again. Another idea he had years before and just chose not to act upon it. But with Inception, it's a lot bigger than Dunkirk. It's the ideas, the story, the characters, everything about this film is... I can see why it took a man 8 years to come up with. But the fact he made 3 films across the 8 years that he was coming up with it. You know, look at James, not to hate on James Cameron or anything, but he had this amazing idea for Avatar, you know, back in the 90s. But then he didn't make anything, am I right, from Titanic? Then was it Avatar straight after?
I think Titanic took a lot out of him. He took a leave of absence until he made Avatar.
Yeah,
years after it was.
And no issues there. You know, as a production standpoint, technology, everything great. But it's the fact no one was making films in between this. I think Emma Thomas in interviews that he would always go back to Inception after finishing a film, like he'd polish up the script or he'd have some new ideas. And I can imagine, because he said it in the behind the scenes as well, that he had this idea, and I reckon this probably started off as a very simple premise, a man in someone's dreams, a low budget film. I've got this image that when this was first dreamed upon, it was like a $40-50 million budget, and it was going to be going into dream stealing, planting, stealing. And then, as you're right, as experience breeds, as his confidence on big production goes up, the ideas go up, the levels, the worlds, and that only enhances this film to a point where Warner Brothers, you know, and to this date, I don't think many other filmmakers can rock up to Warner Brothers and say, give me $160 million for a film about dreams within dreams. It ain't happening. It had to be enough off the back of The Dark Knight. Same with Interstellar. That had to be enough the back of Rises. Dunkirk had a moderately lower budget. Obviously, Tenet's going straight back up to the 200 zone. So I can't, and I say this to you many times, I just still can't comprehend that one man came up with this idea. You know,
obviously every time I watch this film, absolutely.
And you know, of course, he may have had, as you mentioned, Leo was involved with his character. Maybe he spoke to his brother about a couple of things, or Emma, his wife, and stuff. But the core, this is one man credit for story, one man credit for screenplay, and it's the fact I can picture him going back to this every so often, tinkering with it. This idea, and that's the whole irony, is that it's the idea of planting something, which is the film, and probably what he was doing across Begins and everything. And I think he always says it was the right time to make the film. I stand by that. I think a double whammy of Dark Knight followed by Inception. You know, he had the world at his hands in 2008. It was the most in-demand film. One of the, as we mentioned in our review, the third biggest film in cinematic history at the time in terms of box office, Oscars, everything. Of course, he could go up to Warner Brothers and say, let me make this. And to speculate, we'll maybe go into this a little bit deeper in Rises. It's never obviously been written down or confirmed. It never would be. But a lot of people believe that the conversation went along the lines of, let me make Inception and then I'll make Batman 3. Because at the time it was Batman 3 as well. It wasn't Dark Knight Rises. It was Batman 3. And credit where credit's due. He could have easily... How many A-list big blockbuster franchise people do, you know, big blockbuster franchise, then don't do a franchise one, then go back into it with another? You know, JJ did,
of course, don't they? You know, like the Sam Raimi film, that, you know, the Spider-Man trilogy, they're in it for X amount of years.
Even Star Wars with JJ, you know, he chose not to do Episode 8 because he was burnt out, and obviously he came back to 9, but he didn't make a low budget film in between that or anything. Even Rian Johnson did 8, then went straight back into low budget Knives Out. He obviously didn't make 9 either. And it's so rare these days that the controlling the person in the power doesn't get to do it. And again, fair play. I don't think many other people could negotiate that with the company. So I think credit where credit's due. And I was going to say, is it worth going to the cast? Because one of the almighty parts of this film is the cast.
Yes, no, absolutely. The last thing I was going to say is that's where we can't stress enough the importance of The Dark Knight. It gave him that carte blanche to make whatever he wanted. That movie was everything. From here on in, the guy can do absolutely anything. Let's get into the cast for this thing. I don't know how in-depth we're going to talk about everyone, because it is a big cast, as we mentioned, with the ensemble cast. But Leonardo DiCaprio, I think 2010 was also the year of Shutter Island, if I remember rightly.
So Shutter Island came out a couple of months before, which is actually very similar. I only realized that in a work a couple of weeks ago. It's 6 months between them. The
Dead Wife, and like What's Real and what. Yeah, no, absolutely, definitely, and two magnanimous directors as well. Jesus, Scorsese following it up with a Nolan film. Before 2010, I wasn't a Leonardo DiCaprio fan at all. I always kind of, and this is on me, I always kind of chalked him up to that Romeo and Juliet, Titanic kind of persona. Never really did anything for me as an actor. And then 2010, everything was all coming up Leonardo DiCaprio. And they're two of my favorite films, certainly from that year as well. Both made it into my top 25 list of the decade. And he's since gone on from this movie to be probably, if he's not my favorite actor, he's definitely in my top 3 at the moment, especially with the massive hit. We loved it as well, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. He's fantastic in that too. But the actual character of Dom Cobb, I guess this is sort of jumping the gun a little bit to Nolanisms, but the character name from his first ever feature, I didn't know that until fairly recently, until, we went back to watch The Following. But it's such a great character as well, and he is the one that is the most fleshed out throughout the film. And the addition of Ellen Page, I'm going to sort of group her into this. What I'm going to talk about is that her character is very interesting because she is basically the audience proxy. You need a character that is completely clueless in this world in order for the sake of the audience to understand what's going on in the movie. A lot of films incorporate that technique and a character like that, a sort of fish out of water kind of thing, where they learn the rules of the world and the makings of the world as we do. So, I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio takes on that role as mentor and everything, but he is a very haunted man. It's, again, a trope that's used in a lot of Nolan films, a tortured character from their past, trying to work things out. But, I mean, it's just a fascinating character. I really love it. He's one of my favorite things in the film. I think it's really good chemistry with him and Marion Cotillard throughout the film as well. Very uneasy moments, never really knowing what to trust. I guess this is sort of, I'm just lumping every character into this, I guess, but the original concept for this film was going to be a horror film, and there are elements where you can see that, like Moll's character as well, that even the name Moll means sort of like broken, or you have malnourished and malcontent and things like that. I'm all over the place for this, so you're going to have to help me on this one. But no, he's just a really interesting character, incorporating flashbacks into it and everything. It really fleshes his character out and makes you sort of sympathize with him and gets you on board with the story as well. In what you want to see him get back to his family. You want to see him achieve this, because this has been a thing that he's dealt with for years.
Yeah. It begins with Leo. Even the opening scene, the closing scene, it's his story. We have the world, but then we have the 200 million budget, but the film doesn't work without a protagonist you can align with. Bringing in this haunted individual with the guilt of his wife's death, which obviously you learn throughout the film, it's a different dynamic. Obviously, bring up Shutter Island, it's very similar. And the fact Leo sat down with Christopher Nolan when he made this film, he went over, apparently did a bit of research. Even my dad did after he watched it the other day. 2 other names that were originally fresh for the idea. Again, I haven't researched this. This is on my dad. He doesn't watch this anyway. So, Brad Pitt and Will Smith. Brad Pitt, I could see easily.
We mentioned him in an earlier one, didn't we? Was that for Memento?
Memento, yeah. And apparently Nolan had reached out to Leo for a couple of roles, and he had politely passed on the roles. Obviously, politely passed probably could be anything from scheduling to, I want to make a film with you, but maybe not yet. Or these roles haven't caught me. But this was the one. And this is the most perfect one for Leo. I think no one else could have done this. Maybe Brad Pitt. Certainly not Will Smith. I do like Will Smith, but not in a million years he could have done the emotion. And I think the fact that Leo came in, I'm not going to say he challenged the director because we don't know that, but Chris strikes me the kind of director where he makes the roles. And it's not done and dusted. But Leo had a creative involvement, I think, with this and helped create the character, maybe some lines or everything. I don't imagine too many leads in his films. Maybe Christian Bale probably did. Bale's obviously got that sort of protege, but I don't think many of them could have helped shape the character that Leo did. And it's everything from bringing in Ariadne played by Ellen Page, which I do need to bring up again, thanks to the internet over the years. Here's a little bit of trivia. In Greek mythology, Ariadne is the name for Most Holy. She helped Theseus escape from the Cretan labyrinth.
Oh, the labyrinth, yeah.
And let's not delve into too much Greek mythology, but she helps Leo have guilt over his wife. So there's always been connections. They're not. Maybe
and she's the one who draws the mazes, draws the labyrinth.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
So there's so much I've read over the years. It's built up, and I can't sit here pretending I've got credit. I don't. Someone out there thinks of it. Someone out there finds it. But Leo's the crux of this. I think the film can't work without him. It's hard to go into without bringing the others in. I want to bring a couple in. You mentioned Mal, played by Marion Cotillard, who I think is incredible in this film. She's terrifying at the same time.
This is one of my favourite roles she's ever done, I think, from this film.
Off the back of also worth bringing up, is it La Vie en Rose was the biopic where she played Edith Piaf, who, of course, sang Je ne regrette rien, which is the
connected.
Kick song. It's the Kick song, and the year she won her Oscar was the same year Ellen Page was nominated for Juno, and then both of them straight away. They both of them straight away did this next. So there's probably a conversation that Oscar
where you're
year.
Connecting all your string here, isn't it? Just like
it is, isn't it? Like, but it's worth bringing these things up. But I think those two supporting characters in terms of plots and character development are probably the most important. But Leo steals it. You know, he doesn't have the big action set pieces. He doesn't have, but he has the core character arc that you need to work. If Leo's arc doesn't work, unfortunately, the film can't work. Yes, they've got an idea, which we'll get into Cillian Murphy very quickly, but that idea could also be superseded by another idea, which I'll speak about when we get to the ending, because I don't know if I've ever told you this theory, but we'll get to it later on. But I want to quickly bring up some of the others.
Yeah,
it's just hard to say Leo's great. It's not Leo's best performance. I'm not going to sit here and sound like I'm crapping on it. I'm not at all. It's incredible. Don't think he would have been like worthy of an Oscar nomination for this.
No, I agree with
he was great. He was great in this film, but I think this film is about the ensemble cast with the production set pieces.
Yeah.
So another one worth bringing up is Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who would later go on to star as Robin in the Dark Knight Rises. And that's his birth name, Chris. But we'll
you're taking the pot shots already, aren't you?
Joseph Gordon-Levitt, I think he's great for this slick. He's not really a New Yorker in it, but he's got the slicked hair. He's the guy in the suit.
It made me always want a waistcoat after seeing him in this film. He's a sharp dress. Everyone's sharp dressed man in this film. But I guess that's a Nolanism for you right there. Yeah,
and I think Joseph Gordon-Levitt's great. We always say him. It's the he's the one that talks the plot to the people. Everything that needs describing, if it's not done by Leo very vaguely, Joseph Gordon-Levitt will develop it in the next sentence, just so you can get it home. He's got a clear voice. It's very important for this. Then you've got, I guess we can bring up quickly, the rise of Tom Hardy off the back of Bronson, which is phenomenal if people haven't seen that. That was a low-budget British production about, obviously, a famous prisoner. Nolan cast him in Inception. The rest is history. The streak Tom Hardy went on from this probably up until not Venom, maybe let's not include Lawless, but Tom Hardy isn't Tom Hardy without Inception. This was his really big international breakthrough. The moment he sat there in Mombasa in his jacket, his sort of charisma, you can see why he was cast in this. You can see why he's been brought back in Dunkirk, brought back in Dark Knight Rises. Arguably, he has better performances, I think, in both of those, down to his eyes. But he is great in this, and getting to the Bond conversations, which may come down the line, the snow level is all about Tom Hardy. Who else am I missing? Ken Watanabe, very quickly. He's absolutely fine. Obviously, he was the decoy Ra's al Ghul in Begins. He has a little bit more to do in this one. I don't want to sit here going for everyone, but I kind of need to. But I do want to bring up Cillian Murphy. I think he's worthy of his own segment. The whole film doesn't work without Cillian Murphy as much as it doesn't work without Leonardo DiCaprio. He is the son of, I keep forgetting the character names. Pete Postlethwaite, who is that's the name of the actor, one of his last roles, legendary British actor, has one of my favourite scenes in this film, one of the most emotional scenes, which we'll get to shortly. Not shortly, the next part. But
at some point during this review.
Yes, at some point. We're all over the place. We're the same as this film. But Cillian Murphy's the crux. You know, he's the son of a CEO tycoon that essentially the goal is Ken Watanabe, that's his corporate rival. He wants him to dissolve the company so Ken Watanabe can reign supreme. How many heist films does it involve actually being on the villain side of things? And that's something that always hit me with Inception. And Cillian Murphy's kind of the victim in this. He's not ever seen as an antagonist. That's another thing I like in this. In heist films, the person they're robbing from, they'll make out they're horrible. they're vermin, they need to be stopped. And Cillian Murphy is the opposite. His character develops, you begin to understand him, empathize with him, and I think it's a phenomenal performance from him in the scenes he has. It's quite limited, and it doesn't even strike you. It just keeps developing as they go further into the dreams. You go more and more with Cillian Murphy's character. I think that's one of my favorite things about this film. So I think it's worth bringing him up. I think that's everyone.
And chuck Michael Caine in there for good measure, because it's a Christopher Nolan film, right? Not so. That's like, it's almost like the whole Tim Burton, Danny Elfman, Johnny Depp trio that we had for years and years. You just come to expect it. Michael Caine's probably going to be in there somewhere. But no, I echo all of your sentiments that you went through and all the characters. I think it was Tom Hardy's persona, just jumping back to Eames's character. We saw it in the trailer. You mustn't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling. I think that was a line that stuck out for a lot of people. That got one of the biggest laughs in the film every time I watch it. Yeah, and it's nice to get all the different personalities as well, because there's a little bit of like friendly banter and rivalry between him and Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, especially when they're coming up with ideas. It's almost, like a little bickering, like squabbling school children or something like that. Mentioned Marion Cotillard, but yeah, Cillian Murphy, we'd seen him as Scarecrow, as the very terrifying Dr. Jonathan Crane. And it's just nice to see him get to play with some more of that emotion and, that character writing with this one. And we'll see that again when we get to Dunkirk with that. He's one of my favorite characters in that film, actually, in Dunkirk. Again, like with Pete Postlethwaite, as you mentioned, like legendary British actor, but when you know that this was one of his last roles, it's already an emotional scene in terms of the writing and the actual context of the characters, but it just adds that other level to it as well when you get to that moment. And I guess, yeah, when you've got like Leonardo DiCaprio, you've got a lot of emotion with him and Mol, and the whole story kind of centers around him. But the actual, I'd say that's where the story is, but the plot revolves around Cillian Murphy's character, essentially, and what's going on with that thing. So I think it's right to have those be the two focal characters that you have that emotion with. And then everyone else is just kind of there ultimately to do a job. And that's the role that they serve throughout the film. So I think that probably covers us on cast. So if we want to go into like the world building and stuff now. So in terms of like other films that this reminds me of sort of around the time and probably that Christopher Nolan took inspiration from. Well, first and foremost, it was originally going to be a horror film, as I mentioned. And the only horror film I can think that deals with dreams is, and hear me out on this, A Nightmare on Elm Street with Freddy Krueger. You do have these multiple dream levels and people being pursued through dreams and just entering a random world, in interconnected kind of worlds. I'd love to see Christopher Nolan do a horror film. I think that would have been a very interesting concept. Obviously, it's been done in a more of a slasher genre way with that film, but I would have liked to have seen... And there are elements of this film that you can see that are tending more to... I'm not going to say this film's a horror film by any stretch of the imagination, but there's moments where the subconscious projections in the world will converge on someone, and there's moments where if the dreamer is realizing that it is a dream, they'll all stop and just stare. And there's moments like that where I could see seeds of how this could be worked into like a horror thing. You've got Mol towards the beginning of the movie as well, who's this kind of phantom-like figure that will drift through in the background somehow. She appears, disappears, and she's very cryptic. And I love the way that Marion Cotillard plays that character as well. She gets the emotional scenes, but she can play uneasy very well. We've seen that in, was it called Allied, with her and Brad Pitt? Yeah. A character that you never know whether to trust or not. And then obviously Dark Knight Rises in a similar way as well. And other films that it reminds me of, I guess The Matrix is probably another big comparison to throw out there. The fact that you have all these people sort of in a room together, you plug them in and they all go into... In The Matrix, it's a computer world, but it is a fantasy world, essentially, where you can bend the rules in there and change things in there, physics or whatever. It's a very similar sort of concept. And I have to guess that Christopher Nolan was probably inspired by a lot of those 90s movies as well, that dealt with that kind of thing.
I think I've not seen Nightmare on Elm Street, so I can't jump on that too much. But certainly Matrix, if you look at obviously the way it was 99, beginning of the sort of Y2K computer world, and you have that film which revolutionized filmmaking as well. That's worth bringing up. Same year as Phantom Menace. It's hard not to see him being inspired. When you look at budget as well, skyscrapers for the Matrix, bullet time, everything. There's big budgets in there, and I can imagine that certainly plugging them in. It has that Matrix vibe to it. It's just done in a completely different way. But it's the one thing I always liked to the Matrix film I saw was when it would jump between worlds, it was never done in a way to confuse you. You always knew what world you were in from the moment you cut to it. And I think that's the same in Inception when you get into those dream levels. Obviously, you have, it's all about the locations. You've got the rain world, the hotel, the snow world, the crumbling world. It's kind of like Star Wars when you think of the Star Wars films that, every planet is pretty much the same, snow, sun, Hoth, deserts. That kind of vibe, Star Wars, you always know where you are when you cut to it for the important ones. And I certainly feel like that with Inception. I think if that doesn't work, then people can get lost even easier.
And I think Wally Pfister did the cinematography for this thing again, didn't he? I think that's aided a lot with sort of like the color correction, everything like that, and obviously like the locations as well, the very striking different locations. I'm absolutely with you. If they at all looked any kind of way similar, you'd have been lost in this thing. You wouldn't have known the levels. So, I mean, I do question why there's a hotel in the middle of like a mountain range. It's very weird in the snow, but we'll get into that and the inspiration that led from that. It's fine, you accept it. They are all strikingly different, and I think that definitely helps the film, and it just keeps it varied as well. Ultimately, when you get towards the end of this film and they're all riding the kicks back up, and each level, you basically have like 4 film climaxes all happening at the same time that you're intercutting. Any one of these segments for the ending could be your main ending for a singular film, but Christopher Nolan has like 4 of them at the same time.
Do we want to go into them each individually very quickly?
Yes, I guess we can, yeah.
Off cuff, we can kind of say we can go through the big stunt for each one maybe as well. But obviously, reality, boring. We don't need to talk about that. That says it is the airplane.
What is one of the longest plane journeys in the world, Sydney to Los Angeles.
Which, that's probably true. And that's why I love the fact they suddenly decide to make the British people Australians in it to make that work, even though they've got British accents. But anyway.
I think actually that on a weird tangent, that's the journey that they make in Lost. It's one of the, and they mention in that it's one of the longest overflights. Yeah.
I was going to make a David Escoy connection, but that's really clutching at straws. Dream one's the rain world. Now, I've never been to LA. The reputation of LA is it's always sunny, it's always boiling, it's hot. I believe they created rain machines so that they could film the car chase and everything in downtown LA, which is apparently
because the weather was too nice all the time. They couldn't get it right.
And I've loved that from the moment I first heard about that. It was just like, okay, this is, he could have gone anywhere in the world. He could have gone to a place that would have had, raining 24/7. He could have come to England in winter or anything. And it's like, no, I'm going to do LA. And then we're going to add all these artificial rain. It's worth looking at behind the scenes if you haven't already.
But don't they mention in the film about the rain? Like I noticed, as I said, I notice things all the time. It's because he needs the toilet or something. Yeah, there's a line in there from Joseph Gordon-Levitt, like, "Oh, you couldn't have used the bathroom before you got on the flight." And I never realized that until rewatching it just before we did this review.
I'd noticed it before and hadn't really thought about it much. But when he sits down the flight, he actually has a champagne straight away.
Oh, okay. Oh, this is amazing.
He's kind of smiling as he sits in the plane. And I mean, we didn't talk about Yusuf. He's great. I like him. He's kind of more important than he's marketed as, but he's not got too much to do. But he's essentially in the driver in the dream world, and he's got some pretty funny comedic moments. But the big one of this is obviously level 1 of the dream. It's an interrogation scene. You've got the whole Tom Hardy makeup thing, the interrogation 528-491, which we will get to because that is very important as time goes by. But I guess the core of this one is is it really a car chase? Not delving into it too much, but you get the train in the street, the freight train, which if anyone's seen behind the scenes, they literally build a train onto like a vehicle type thing, so it even looks genuine. And they just have it terrible. And every time I watch this, I end up like just crapping myself. I know it's coming.
It's so loud,
but it's so loud, and it's so unexpected as well. But it just gets you every time, and it's a great scene as you progress into the film, thinking it's another one of Leo's memories, because at this point you don't know how integral the train is. Obviously, you do get the "we're waiting for a train" lines, but that's this kind of teasing. Ellen Page knows what's up from the get-go. She knows that's Leo's dream, and she doesn't want to tell them. She takes the blame for it. But I guess we can say we get the revelation that if you die in the Inception, sedated, you're going to go into limbo. You won't wake up.
And I love that moment as well, because everything that had been established before that point was a simple kill yourself or like give yourself a kick and you've woken up and everything's fine. And it's in this moment where it completely turns the tables on its head, and it's like, no, if you die, it gives it more stakes, doesn't it? It gives it more tension when you've got all these people converging on the place in every single level. There's that sort of like ticking clock element to it as well. And when you change the stakes like that, saying no, death equals essentially death in Limbo, it just gives it so much more power at that point.
And it's a click as well. It happens to the one character they didn't want on the journey, the one backing it, and the one that would be responsible for Leo getting home. I think it was a smart choice for that part. But suddenly there are stakes to it when there weren't there before. And then the fact that Cillian Murphy's got a private army, which they also didn't think was going to come, because in this world you can be trained on dream software, which I love the concept of, which they delve into, I guess, in League 2. But we get the car chase, which is fine. We get the Dream a Little Bigger Darling thing, but that's the moment where the stakes raised, and I think that reinforces what comes next, because I guess the big stunt is the van driving off the edge of the bridge, which is great. I love very quickly as he drives past. Have you ever seen it? He holds his middle finger up.
Yeah,
it's very subtle. You don't really get a lot of swearing in Nolan films. I think that's worth saying, but that's a very English thing. I thought that Americans aren't take swearing, but it's the fact he's as he's reversing by, he does it. I always laugh at that. I don't know why, but another great one is that when he spins the truck, he turns around and is like, "Did you all see that?" And obviously they're all asleep.
I think that one joke, yeah, that's my favorite. I do love that one, and I guess that's a good segue from that rolling down, because everything's connected. All levels. We get on to this is my favorite level of all the dreams. It's the hotel. I think it's a really the fact that you have the bar segment. I think they actually built that as a set, didn't they? Which they
tilting set, yeah.
It just looks great. The cinematography in this scene, I just love the setting of it. It's just really interesting. All these, again, like every level has to be like a maze, because it's harder for the projections to find them, essentially. And what better way to do a hotel, right? Because of all the corridors and everything. But this leads to one of my favorite. So it's relatively short as well. Like when I was rewatching it, it's not like a drawn out segment. It's just the right length. It's one of the most memorable parts of the film, and for good reason as well. And the lengths they went to go to build this thing for a very short amount of screen time as well is just testament to Nolan's directing and his vision as well. It's the corridor spin. It's, when you see that in the trailer, that's the part of the film you want to see. It looks the most interesting. It's still great. We'll get onto the music later, but everything coming together and the knock-on effect that everything from the level above can have on the stuff down below. It's a truck just falling down a bit of a hill and rolling over can lead to one of the best action scenes of all time, in my opinion, or it's certainly like set pieces.
Absolutely. I mean, it's worth mentioning that Nolan said he was inspired by 2001 for this. They don't have the set piece, but they have obviously the corridor, which we can delve into a bit more in terms of inspiration in the Interstellar review. But the idea to put a fight scene on a revolving doorway, the photos of the set look like they're from the 1600s. It's remarkable they somehow built this. Remarkable they filmed it. And the fact it's not CG, it's real. That is Joseph Gordon-Levitt and a stunt person flying around. I think there's interviews where Joseph Gordon-Levitt says that it took him 6 weeks to do. It's about a minute and a half, which works in regards to the dream layers being slow. A 15, 20-second car spinning would be a minute or two in the dream world, which we get. And even that's nailed down, but this scene isn't too long. It isn't too short. It's a perfect amount. I had goosebumps watching this on Wednesday. I've never had that before with this scene. But it's the music, which we will get to, that sells everything, and it's just phenomenal. And even when I rewatch it, you get gifs of it, and it just doesn't look like they're humans doing it, but they are. And it complete respect to obviously the direction, but the stunt teams that were doing it, the people that were training them. That's an incredibly hard thing to try and do. It is like a video game, and I think worth mentioning with Inception that Nolan has hinted in the past that he'd been intrigued by continuing Inception into a video game, which would be remarkable. He says if he ever delved into them, he'd want to do that. I don't know what year he said that. I'd hope that never does happen in regards to him doing video games, because he's better than that. But I can certainly see that video game style aesthetic working in that hallway scene.
Is there any video game that ties in with a Christopher Nolan film, the Batman Begins one? Yeah, that's the one I can. I don't think they did any other ones, did they? I think they were working on a Dark Knight one, but then that kind of got canned, and then it eventually became Arkham Asylum, which was completely different.
I think with the era of game, like back then, you used to get the films for the games for every film that would come out. You'd get clips from it, and they did shy away from that, which I do get because it is very expensive to make, and they were normally awful. But Inception, the concept would work elsewhere, but the hallway fight is just it's incredible. And even bringing up 3D ever so quickly. Sorry, I now jumped off point here. He did actually say he tested a couple of scenes from the film in 3D. I'd say tested. He probably did that at Warner Brothers' request, knowing full well he had no intention of ever doing it. But if there was going to be a 3D Nolan film, it would have had to have been this one.
I think that's probably why they pushed for that, to be honest.
Yeah, and the year it was as well.
As well, you know, you'd have Avatar came out, which kind of propelled and it's amazing that I know that 3D is still around, but you had that boom and it's just gone away. No one, I don't want to speak for everyone, but no one really cares about 3D anymore. I'm sure it will come back when you have Avatar 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But yeah, and I know that Nolan mentioned about that he's never really liked 3D as well in terms of the actual projection. When you're watching it, it dulls the image completely, and it takes a lot away from the actual color temp and everything of the image. So I do respect him for not converting this or anything like that, because around this time you had all those like really bad 3D conversions as well, and you just don't need that. If he was going to do 3D, he'd want it to be done properly, I would assume. Not that he wants to, and thank God there's one director out there that doesn't want to do that. And then we get on to, I mean, again, we're probably going to have to pass over to you for this one, because this is your kind of thing, but layer 3 of the dreams, we have Snowy Hospital, which is very weird, but it was all for a reason. It's basically the tribute / homage level of the dream to Christopher Nolan's favorite James Bond film, On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yes, this is the one where from this day onwards, the Nolan to direct Bond rumor started. I believe it happened in the press tour for Inception. So I mentioned it. He said, Majesty's Secret Service is my favorite Bond film. The third level was inspired because obviously in that film you have the military base in the mountains, which we may talk about in October. There's a hint of what's to come. And you see that more than ever, more than any of his other films. Maybe until Tenet, because it's gone from being inspiration by Bond to now it's just espionage films to avoid people asking him, are you directing James Bond yet? But the Snowy Mountain thing is incredible because, as we mentioned, it's the different palettes, the different environments. It's the deepest level of the dream, so why not have a base in a snowy mountain? And they've got to steal something from it. They've got to find what's in there. And I think in terms of the final one, you know, in sense of scale, it is the finale. They are at that location. The hotel's great. It's got the hallway sequence. The car chase in the rain is great, but if you look at a structure of a film, you'd very much get your car chase, dialogue, big finale ending, and even the dream layers have that. And I just love the aesthetic from this. The concept they've got to raid it. You've got this people that are skiing down the slopes, getting shot, and it is a James Bond sequence. And obviously, the one name they always throw about with Christopher Nolan and Bond is Tom Hardy, who I do adore, who I don't think could be Bond in a really polite way. Yeah. But it's because in this scene, because of how strong he is, we talk about him being his physicality, but when he's in the snow level, he is like just fighting everyone. Like we've seen Bronson, obviously this is before Fighter, before Dark Knight Rises, but you can tell he's a pretty physically well done bloke in this film, not obviously outside of film, we know he is, and he's great in this moment. This is essentially his level. He's got to get Cillian Murphy past the vault doors to get that great. I was really excited to see what was behind the doors.
I like that moment as well because it shows that he did have legitimate investment and he was curious to see what was going to happen.
Yeah, and I think it's... I don't know if it's my... I think it's my favourite because of the homage to Bond and the influence the Bond films had on me as someone that was quite young. But obviously, I think The Hallway is the best in regards to the filmmaking. I mean, they're all great. It's silly to really pick what's your favorite level, like it is a video game. But you get obviously the whole build-up of Mal coming down. There's someone there, take the shot, and he hesitates. He can't do it. He does it once Cillian's been shot twice, which is, again, in this kind of big blockbuster film, the music is fully engulfed, ready for Cillian Murphy to go through the doors, and the boss comes in, shoots him, and it's done. And they know what they have to do. They've got to delve into Limbo, which... we've only seen in the opening scene at this point in time, and we've only heard the stories about it. But I think it's worth bringing up that Ken Watanabe's character is pretty much, he's dead at this point. He does the great moment where he throws the grenade down. He does die in it, and they know that they know they've got to go down into the final Limbo to find him. So one thing before we get to Limbo, this is what I noticed on the recent viewing, which is crazy because it took 10 years. Limbo is only there for the shared dreams, which I personally didn't know.
Right, okay.
So Limbo exists when there are more than two people sharing it. That's something new I found out. I need to do a bit more research into that. Again, 10 years later, and I'm finding out a whole new thing. which is integral because obviously you go to the opening scene and you're inside Ken Watanabe's dream and it's his nice decor building, and that part of his dream does come into limbo with him. Granted, he's 50 years older, but I guess it's worth jumping into the final world that Leo has to go down there to basically find Cillian Murphy with Ellen Page. They will use the defibrillators as a kick to go back up into the worlds for the neat sort of, what would you call it? Not the kicks, but it's almost like a step ladder, isn't it? Where it's like you're going to go one step each to get back to reality.
To get back to the top. Yeah, absolutely. I did, before we get onto Limbo, I did want to talk about, because we mentioned like 10 years on, and I've seen this film countless times. I thought I had everything down. I knew every theory. I knew where I stood on the movie. I watched this before we did this review, and I had 1,000,001 questions, which of course I sent to you in the private chat. Like, what does this mean, George? Help me understand this film some more. 10 years on, and still new things, and it's amazing that a film can do that. But when Cillian Murphy on the third level gets shot, he gets 2 to the chest, and he's dead. He's done. The defibrillators bring him back to life, and he's still alive in Limbo, because I know that the timing and everything, it sort of lessens somewhat incrementally as you go deeper into the level. So, of course, he'd still be alive in Limbo. But I thought if you die, like, that's it. Why wouldn't Cillian Murphy be lost in Limbo as Ken Watanabe's character is? And it would take decades to find Cillian Murphy as well as Saito. He might have to find both of them down there. But it's very quick. It's just, no, we just got to go to Limbo, get him done, and it's over in like 10 minutes and he's back to life. And he's walking around like nothing happened. And similar to Cobb as well when he's in Limbo. And Mole stabs him twice with the kitchen knife in the chest, shrugs it off like nothing's happened. So that part did confuse me. I'm not going to say it's a plot hole, because I'm probably just not understanding some aspect about it, and there probably is 1,000,001 explanations as to why it works, and I shouldn't be questioning it. But I don't know if I've missed something, but I did notice that on a rewatch of it.
The kitchen knife, I'm glad you brought, because I'd never thought of it till you messaged me, and it just feels like it's played for drama. Like it's here's the ending, here's the villain going, and he has the great speech where he lets it go. He says, you know, you're not in reality. He obviously confesses that he performed Inception on her, which we will get into actually properly, I guess, very soon. But I know that, you know, he says moles took him. I know where they'll be. So I understand that bit, how that bit goes very, very quick. And it's like, here's our house, our other house, her house, which obviously you do find out that's where he planted the idea. But if you hadn't messaged me on Tuesday, I wouldn't have gone into Inception fully focused on the Limbo, because you asked me questions that I'd never thought about, which is great. As we mentioned, we're 10 years down the line. Normally, if we ask each other questions about film, we've pretty much got an answer for each other, or at least interpretation. But that was something completely new to me. So I went in this with a different eye set for once. And it's the Ken Watanabe stuff. And one thing I never really fully noticed is that they mentioned that you can get lost down in the dreams. And obviously he speaks about how he grew old with... not with Karen, sorry, with Mole. I don't know where the hell Karen came from.
She's a bit of a Karen in this film.
But I think, because obviously they use the kick to... Because I always wondered that, but, you know, the dying in Limbo, I don't really get it, because they said you can't. And a bit of research online, a bit of paying attention. I'm not paying attention, that's the wrong word, but trying to look at it from a different perspective in the film. They kind of mention in the first couple of layers that because you're more and more sedated, your body reacts less. So I'm interpreting it and assuming it as the further down the dream layers you go, the more responsive you are. That's how I kind of went in. Right. That's how I kind of saw it. That I could be completely wrong. You know, it's don't take anyone's word for this. The whole point of this film is to have your own ideas and beliefs. But I kind of saw it in that sense, perhaps. Because if you think about the kicks, you know, level 1 is a car going directly into water. Level 2 is, you know, I know there's an explosion, but it's the gravity drop. Yeah, and it's also the music. Level 3 is a building falling apart. One's probably, in terms of the outright kick, the biggest one. So I wonder if the sedation thing's something. But obviously, if you get killed in Limbo, then obviously you go back up the chain, which I hadn't fully understood. I just assumed that Limbo wakes you up directly. But from the way Ellen Page did the defibrillator thing, it's 111. So that's my interpretation.
This is the part of the review where we talk out loud, trying to understand theories about it. The other one that I thought of as well was, why is Saito like ridiculously really old when he gets there, and Cillian Murphy isn't, for example? But then I thought, and I was thinking about this before we did the review, that he died higher up and he was dead for a longer period of time than Cillian Murphy was. So therefore, how the timing works, where it's like decades in Limbo or however it works, he probably would have aged like 4 decades or so. I don't know. Maybe if someone's watching at this point and knows what we're talking about, let us know in the comments what you think of all this stuff. But
it's worth mixed. I hadn't ever thought about that again until you mentioned it, and I just assumed because when Leo wakes up on the beach, he's a bit confused. He's not with it.
But he's the same age, you know.
That's the thing, and I wonder how long he was looking for. He's got the same clothes, obviously, as well. I think that's another thing. And obviously, Caine Massimi's age again could have been easy to have not done mocap because he wasn't around there, but you could have hired another actor. But no, let's get Caine Massimi in prosthetics. So because it does look like him still, the eyes and obviously the voice. I love the building; it works well for the cut into scene 2, I guess, of the film. But I like the fact that he's completely forgotten who he is, and they kind of make that point in Limbo that you're there for so long, you don't think of reality. And if he's in his dream of his building, I understand that maybe more, but I like the fact that, you know, he just puts the gun down. We know where we're going to get to. And also, going back to the opening scene, it's a great way to... How do you want to raise the questions of how confusing this film is? It's the cut from old man to young man as they go around the shoulder. I think that's a really great thing. And it works for we'll go into Nolanisms later, but the whole non-linear stuff, I think it worked out really well that was actually Limbo. And then you get the dial back to humanity. But Limbo is a weird one. I'm going to say it's probably the one I do get it, but that's probably the one where the ideas are probably more wild and extravagant online. Yeah. And I like the fact I don't think you need too much time down there because unfortunately the downside of loving the soundtrack is knowing the song lengths. And when you know that Waiting for a Train is 9 minutes and 4 seconds, the moment the song starts, you realise that there's literally 9 minutes left, which was a very strange experience. I've not really had that before. But yeah, we're getting into this part of the review, aren't we? Now we're deep. We're in there.
There's probably like 1,000,001 other questions we could raise about this thing, but we'll try and keep it to a minimum because we do still have a few other things to talk about. In terms of the world building, I guess this all sort of like moves on to Nolanisms because this is a trope that he does. You're dealing with a concept about dreams, which is pretty much an infinite concept. You could do any crazy, wild thing on camera, and while you do get some things, you know, like a train going through a street, or you get the Penrose staircase, like the infinite paradoxical staircase that never ends. You get a city folding in on itself, which is probably the most out there part of the film in terms of the dream stuff and the moment where they sort of like walk up the wall at like a 90-degree angle. That's probably the craziest it gets. It's like the whole Nolan take on Batman. It's grounded. It feels like taking dreams but grounding them. There's no sort of wild and wonderful environments. Even Limbo is very much just sort of like a crumbling city, but it's a city nonetheless. And I don't know whether part of me would have liked to have seen the realms of possibilities with dealing with this world of what you could have done. And it's a bit of a shame that a lot of the levels are just, and it explains why they have to be designed like that. So it's not a plot hole or anything, that it is kind of just a rainy Los Angeles street. It is just a hotel. It's just sort of like a military compound in the snow. And I'm torn because part of me would have loved to have seen Nolan just go completely nuts with this thing and just show us all this crazy paradoxical stuff that you can do. But it is kept more grounded. So I don't know how I feel about that. I would have liked maybe to have seen more of those infinite staircase moments and more of those folding cities and everything like that. I don't want it to get too mired in CGI. It would become a very different film. And I love this film for what it is. But I did think it's worth noticing that, mentioning, that even though you're dealing with dreams, it still does feel very much within our world and within the realms of possibility in our world, even with the technology. I think, again, the briefcase and everything, the technology that can see is probably the most out there part. It's like in a not too distant future kind of thing where this technology is available, but fundamentally, more or less, everything else still functions the same as it does in our everyday world now.
I've never thought about it that way. I think with that one, it's nice because it is like Batman is a reality. I think the whole point of that's to get to the ending point that I think in the folding world, you get, you know, when she's making things as she's walking along, like sort of playing like a Sims game, like here's a bridge, here's this, here's that, like Fortnite and stuff. And I think Leo kind of says, doesn't he, like you need to.
You can't change things too much because then the subconscious become aware of the unnatural quality of the dream. It has to feel real, doesn't it? And that's the point. I understand that it works in terms of the narrative, but in terms of
I think in terms of filmmaking, I think it's a lot of it's there for so we can shoot this as, I guess, as practical as you can say he always goes with. So maybe it's to do with that, I don't know, but I've always seen it in that way, and I think it's to get the question for the ending. But in terms of if you look at the biggest things, the exploding street, the folding city, that's all in Ariadne's first sort of interferences, I guess, with the dream worlds, and she's not hit that point where she needs a reality thing. When she says don't draw off real things, because obviously the Mal thing when she comes in, terrifying, stabs them both, the freight train, and I think that device is also used to help Leo's character because he can't control his own subconscious. He needs things to be reality. Obviously, you mentioned horror earlier. His sort of prison of memories is an incredible concept. Completely terrifying, completely wrong, but it works so well for this sort of guilt-ridden character. But no, I completely understand that from the world-building thing, especially when you look at the posters. And so I was looking on the wall. You get the whole folding world on the poster and everything like that. And I do get it. But I think the reality thing, I think it helps keep it straight. Maybe like if it was too much, if there was space, if there was flying, maybe it'd reach a point of like Shark Boy and Lava Girl going into dreams. I don't know. Yeah.
But, absolutely.
I certainly see that being a Nolan thing, that he wanted it to be as real as he could get it, I guess. I don't know. It's a good point.
I don't have a problem with it. As I said, I love this film, but I thought it was worth noticing.
Yeah, no, it's bringing that up. That's a good thing to bring up, because I've not really had that before, actually.
But I guess this will take us on to Nolanisms then. So I dropped one earlier about the name Cobb is the name of the, or not main, is it the protagonist? No, it's the...
Technically, he's like the Rob Patterson, the Rob Patterson of Following, who is great.
So he's also a thief. He also has a briefcase in the film. I don't know. There's a little comparison there, but especially around the time that he had this idea, you followed it up with Memento. You had Insomnia, and then he had the idea for this one right after or around the time of Insomnia. And those first two films certainly do deal with that concept of, is the world real that we're in, and sense of reality and understanding things. Questioning one's reality and everything like that. You had, really the ending scene of Memento, where you're trying to remember something that's happened, which is very similar to remembering the number subconsciously for the safe combination. It reminded me of that. And also at the end, where he's driving and he's about to revert back to 15 minutes ago with his memory. He closes his eyes and he says, is the world still out there? Is this the real life? Is this just fantasy, essentially? And he wakes up from it. So there's that concept there. And Insomnia as well, seeing those visions, seeing those flashes and being haunted by something from the past. We've mentioned this in a lot of Christopher Nolan's films. He always deals with those very sort of damaged characters, psychologically damaged characters in some way. So there's two comparisons there to earlier films. I don't know if you noticed any other ones other than the non-linear storytelling kind of stuff.
I like the fact you brought up the sort of the flashbacks one, because in this it'll be anything from the curtain to blowing, and then it's like, here's a flashback to Mal or something. And I think it's really neat with that. Obviously the really obvious ones are non-linear narrative. Don't think it's as complex as they make out. It's just more the starting scene is obviously different age point. The suits are always brought up for Nolanisms. Everyone kind of laughs these days. Everyone's in sharp suits looking, and there's always a character that looks like Christopher Nolan in the film. Leonardo DiCaprio is that. If you guys have ever seen the behind the scenes photos of them together on this, it's actually quite funny. I don't really make anything of it. I don't think it's intentional, but for this kind of film, I mean, I know it's a bit extreme to go into suits. If they were all there wearing trackies and polo shirts, you wouldn't have that kind of, this is a big deal thing. The fact they're doing everything in suits across all these worlds is like, they're sharp, they're going to the point, and it's like increases the stakes in a really weird perspective. No, one other thing, I think it's more the alignment. Do you agree with the protagonist? Are you against him? Is he taking things too far? Obviously, the character of Cobb, you learn that he planted the idea of Inception on his wife after all. That's why he's so guilt-ridden it. They kind of take your points, from the start, it's his crazy wife that's killing everyone, to his guilt when he shouldn't have it, to he planted the idea, to the explanation of idea that I only planted it because she didn't want to wake up from limbo. And unfortunately, I didn't know that idea could stick, thus creating Inception. So I thought that was a really neat thing, because obviously you do get into some of his other films where does the protagonist take it too far at times? Are you going to fully like Memento is one of them? Do you start to question Al Pacino and Insomnia? You've seen it in those. Interstellar, you're kind of with Matthew McConaughey throughout, but there reaches decisions in that film where is he doing the right thing from a selfish standpoint, or is he doing it from a mankind point? So you do get them, and obviously Dunkirk's the big one where it's just a fight for survival. So I think the character elements are there, certainly, and obviously another really boring, easy one is the casts. Obviously, you mentioned Michael. This is the one that influences his next film the most.
Absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of cast members from this one that come back in Dark Knight Rises.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt is great. Marion Cotillard is great. Obviously, Michael Caine is Michael Caine. I only got sort of two short scenes, but I'm actually going to get into him towards the ending because there's a really good theory, which I think a lot of people do believe in. But I would obviously Tom Hardy. So I think it's quite, in terms of Nolanisms, in terms of one man coming up with this idea that and not anyone else can execute, this is to me the most Christopher Nolan film of them all. I think if you were going to, you know how we speak about Star Wars, where we have our favorites, a favorite Star Wars film, what we think the best is. Nolan invented this horrible territory of, this is a Christopher Nolan film, but like, here's a great film, here's a Nolan film, here's a maybe Batman film, or do you prefer this? And Inception is the one that I put as the, if you were going to tell the world about one director and you can only show them one film of his and to show them how he has become this director, it has to be this, for the ideas, for the scale, for the writing, for the characters, for everything. I think it's worth mentioning the cinematography. It's not his final film with apologies, Wally Pfister,
yeah.
But this is the film Wally Pfister won cinematography for after a couple of nominations already. So that was nice. And obviously, off the back of this, he then got to make Transcendence.
Has he done? I don't think he's done anything else since that.
And he's not done a Nolan film since either, because Hoyt van Hoytema is exceptional. Who's obviously took over since Interstellar. But in terms of Nolan, I think it's more the main one. This is the one where people jump to the narrative, and I think this is where people do get lost. That I think, and it's very easy to get lost in this film, you know. But I've always been quite comfortable knowing that I got it first time. It's not a competition. But some people would say they were confused for the sake of saying they're confused.
I think they blow it out of proportion a little bit, don't they? Now you do have to concentrate during more or less every single line of the film, and as I said, like, the whole film's getting explained to you pretty much right up until the ending of the film. But you can follow it. It's with any other director. If you're dealing with that amount of exposition, your brain would just turn off at a point. But I think it's fed very naturally. It's not, you don't feel like you're talked down to or anything like that. It still feels like characters that are knowledgeable about these things. They've been put in this situation that they've never been in before, so they're asking questions and understanding it as we are as well. It's just really clever. The only other Nolanism I can think of, but it only really sort of reflects the next movie, and I might be reaching for this one a little bit. You've got the concept of the one last job and then I want to go back to a normal life kind of thing, which is a big thing in terms of the ending of Dark Knight Rises. That's sort of just in terms of the knock-on effect to the next movie. That's the only other one I can think of. There's probably more out there. If anyone can think of any more or comparisons to other Nolan films, do let us know in the comments. But we need to talk about the soundtrack to this thing because, oh damn, this is an absolute powerhouse score from Hans Zimmer. I mean, this is one that I bought. I used to buy soundtracks very often. Sadly, now with like YouTube and everything, I tend to just listen to stuff on the go. This was one that I had to go out and buy. It's one I've listened to countless times. It's just incredible. And the music just builds and it adds that whole layer. It increases the tension. The whole tension in terms of the action, when you get really deep into these dream levels and, you know, in every single level they're being pursued and it's constantly cutting back. The soundtrack never lets up. It's constantly going through there. It doesn't get repetitive in any way. It does give you that adrenaline and pushes you through as the film goes on. But it can also pull back and have those more sort of reflective moments. You've got the electric guitar use in there and the more ambient kind of music. And then this will lead us on to the ending discussion in a minute, but Time, I think that will probably be Hans Zimmer's encore song for now and for always, really. When I went to see him live, could have heard a pin drop during that whole song, and I think it will always have that effect.
Inception is my Inception is my favorite outright soundtrack of history. Obviously, I love Star Wars, but there's 11 soundtracks there. You know, that's not one specific soundtrack, and it is this. From the Bohms, the opening scene, slowing down the Edith Piaf song, building a soundtrack around that. From obviously Time to Mombasa to Dream Within a Dream, everything is perfect. If there's a big moment that needs this big brass score, it has it. if there's a quiet scene, certainly the balcony scene of Mal, when there's a backstory and you're kind of questioning things, he's got a song for that too. You got the emotional crux of the film, 5-8-4-9-1. There's a great score throughout, and the thing about it is it's not different songs playing that don't sound alike. Every song sounds like the Inception soundtrack. Every song sounds like it could have been redone in another way into the film. It's so consistent. And, you know, when you talk about power duos, certain of soundtracks, you get sort of Tim Burton, Danny Elfman, you get Spielberg and John Williams, but I will always add Zimmer and Nolan into that together, the dynasty that those two have. And obviously, we will get to Tenet in a couple of weeks. We do get to Ludwig Göransson, who I'm very excited to listen to, but there is no denying that on day one of the announcement that Zimmer and Nolan weren't teaming up, collectively every Nolan fan in the world kind of had this, like, just this sort of, not heart freeze thing, but it was like, whoa, like
there's been a shake up to the equilibrium that's been established, kind of thing.
Obviously, you know, Zimmer did come out. Obviously, we'll go into it more in Tenet, but he had to pick Dune or Tenet, and Dune, as he said, was his favorite book of all time. Completely understand that, but the score to Inception is phenomenal. It's an absolute disgrace this didn't win the Oscar for best soundtrack.
I know it went to the Social Network,
which is a great soundtrack. It's a great soundtrack. It's a great film, but an absolute sham that Inception didn't get this. Hans Zimmer has one Oscar to his name, and that was The Lion King, which is phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, but the duo they have. You mentioned when we saw him live in Birmingham. Well, we've only known each other for a couple of months at that point. We're both there. It's the encore. I'm not big on track lists when I go to a concert, but I remember the first time I saw him live, I bought the book, and it was like, here's all the soundtrack photos. Like, where's Inception? I was like, this is absolute bollocks. Like, why aren't they doing Inception? It's his most famous one, obviously, for obvious reasons. You know, the curtains close, then they open, and like Johnny Marr was there, and then he obviously did the soundtrack to this as well. That's worth bringing up, actually. Johnny Marr did do the soundtrack in the studio with Hans Zimmer, and he's gone on tour with him to a lot of the London gigs and some of the other ones in America, which I think is really cool because it's like a really random like name. And Zimmer's like that, where everyone loves him. They want to work with him. So why not get Johnny Marr in to help do the Inception soundtrack? Because the guitar riff in it is pretty special. But I don't think there's... Time is the one, isn't it? There's never been a greater song. It's really dour and depressing, but it will play at my funeral. And I've said that for 10 years now. It's perfect. It's a perfect song. I think everyone knows it. Even people that don't listen to soundtracks, I feel they've all heard Time at least one point in their life. And it just has that connection where it's just perfect. And for the scene in the film it's a part of as well.
I'd say this is the ultimate Nolan montage ending for me. This
is it. Let's dive into it. Let's merge sound because it's like a music video to the scene. And we've just had this crazy journey. They've gone on 4 or 5 different levels with each other. And it's the moment where Leo wakes. And then it begins. That moment. I don't know enough about music to say the chords and things like that, but the moment the song kicks in, you know you're at the end. You know, is it working? Is Can Watanabe awake? He is. He makes the phone call. And what you get, it's not even really a montage, is it? It's collectively at the airport, everyone from his private journey is spaced, and they all get their own farewell with the nod, the smile, the wave. And I know it's very strange because they're not too integral to the journey. They are, but you feel important.
It. You do feel it at that moment,
and it's like the Matthew McConaughey like waving at them, like as they're walking by. And obviously, they do the whole tense bit where he puts the passport down, and he does the whole look up thing. And there's obviously "Welcome to the United States." Insert bigger Hans Zimmer noises, and then you get, I guess, the moment. The
moment, the ultimate moment.
The crux of the film, his reunited with his kids. You see their faces for the first time as well. He spins the totem, but he doesn't care anymore. He's with his family. He runs off with Michael Caine, and it's the camera pan to the totem, to the end of time, black screen.
Slight wobble, and then cut off. Yeah.
So, do you believe he's in reality?
I did, until I rewatched it. I still think he probably is in reality. I think it's just I don't have the answers to the questions that I need. The big one for me is that, and I do think it was intentionally made with ambiguity for the precise reason of what we're discussing today, 10 years on, and many other people are, and theorists out there. If you get locked in limbo for years, and I think Tom Hardy has the very eloquent line of, and your brain turns to scrambled egg, you never really get that impression because Saito just wakes up and he kind of looks around, but then he's fine. And he's absolutely fine. I don't think you would react like that had you have spent decades down there. But the big thing for me is that how does DiCaprio wake up? Because we know that when he went to Limbo with Moll in a past life, they put their head on the train tracks, they killed themselves, which immediately woke them up out of Limbo. But so is that the case? If Leonardo DiCaprio just kills himself in Limbo immediately as soon as he's finds Saito, does he come straight back up to the top?
I always thought he got shot, sorry. That's why Saito puts the gun down.
Yeah,
that's what I always thought.
Yeah, so he'd have shot Cobb first, and then he would have shot himself in order to immediately snap yourself out of it. But so if that's the case, then is in reality. But I think it's weird how they leave DiCaprio's body in the car under the water in the first dream level. Because if you think about it, he would have died on every consecutive level above. When the hospital was blown up, he would have been outright killed in that. When the elevator crashed, he would have been killed in that. And he would have been a constant state of drowning, trapped in a car underneath the river, essentially. So I don't know if because he's dead on the upper levels, if that has a knock-on effect to him in Limbo, which would permanently keep him there, or maybe something else. I don't know. I'm just talking out loud right now. I always thought there was, and the main theory that I saw, I don't know if this has been disputed since this, but the big theory that someone found was the wedding ring.
Yeah.
And they make a point of it in the film where they're creating their totems and explaining the need and the necessity for the totems in order to give yourself a semblance of your own reality in a dream. And it has to be personal to you. You can't take someone else's because that defeats the whole purpose of it. I know that Ellen Page has the chess piece. It's the loaded die for... We don't see all of their totems, do we? I think we see Joseph Gordon-Levitt's. But Cobb's one throughout the movie, he took from his wife. That was her totem, the spinning top. That wasn't his. And then I know that there's a theory out there that whenever he's wearing the ring, he's in a dream. When you don't see him wearing the wedding ring, he's in reality. And in the final scene, he's not wearing the wedding ring. Therefore, his totem was his wedding ring. And I quite like that theory. It's not explicitly said. I don't think it lingers on any particular shot of the wedding ring, but I think it's just something that people have noticed over the years.
I love the wedding ring theory because the fact someone noticed a wedding ring being worn in some scenes, not the final ones. I think
and I have to guess that was done for a reason, like Nolan's a smart director. He's good at connecting clues, so that would have been purposely done. So I have to guess that has some relevance to the ending or to some theory.
Chris Nolan said in interviews, he always gets asked and he'll always say no.
I appreciate that you won't say it, though, because I don't want an answer.
He says there is a firm answer. He has always known. I'm assuming Leo knows it as well.
Yeah.
Because the wedding ring theory is a very good one. Whether or not someone spotted it too quickly for what they might have thought could have been the theory. But obviously he's not wearing the wedding ring in the final few scenes, which indicates that he's back in the real world. Speaking of wedding ring theories, that's why this horrible English exam I did in year 11, thanks to Spider-Man 1 and some silly nonsense, the wedding ring Inception theory taught me about writing nonsense in films. Very off tangent. I taught you after we finished recording. So
okay.
It's stupid, funny. But the big one for me with the endings, I believe he's in reality, but it's kind of wavers on to another point. I was totally blown away by the concept of Inception because it's about planting an idea in someone's mind because they do that to obviously kind of maybe now it's worth bringing up the fact that, as we mentioned earlier, that he wants an empire to fall so he can be the dominant factor. It's not the greatest motives, but obviously then try and bring in the fact that Killian had this horrible relationship with his dad. His dad was actually evil. The associate Donald Trump was evil too, and they go into that really well. But the Michael Caine Inception theory to me is the one where people believe that Michael Caine's character used Ariadne to plant the Inception in Cobb's mind to rid himself of the guilt of his wife's death. That is the one that blew me away like none other. I don't know if I've ever told you about this.
That's good. No, that's the first time I've heard that. That's good.
So he keeps saying in the scenes, come back home. Come back to your children. He says he can't. He just can't do it. Obviously, he's wanted, of course, by, police and whatnot. But he had always had the guilt of his wife's death. And Ariadne is his finest student, his best student. She is the audience part into this film. And she is the only one that is questioning him. You know, when he says they think I killed my wife, and that great line of thanks for not asking if I did, because obviously, you know, I'm not saying she knows, but the theory is that Ariadne's obviously been hired by Michael Caine to go into the dream world with him, and to keep going with him to find out the Mal stuff, to have Mal removed, where it obviously reaches its conclusion that he says he'll stay and he doesn't and gets stabbed, which again we kind of said doesn't really work. But when you get back to reality with time, the fact that he's not riddled with the guilt, he's been able to put that past him. He goes to see his kids, he runs off with them, and the idea is that Michael Caine, because obviously Michael Caine's character says he's aware of the dreams, he introduced it all to Cobb until Cobb obviously used it to steal. But the theory is that Michael Caine overarched it being Inception being performed on Leonardo DiCaprio, and that has been in my mind ever since. Was the Inception on Leo as the main character in the film with that arc, or was the Inception on Cillian Murphy? It's technically on both.
That's good.
It's a great thing. And I'd never read this till a couple of years ago.
And there's that kind of, now I'm thinking about that, there's that sort of like, taking it out of context, it's just like, oh, he's happy that he's back with his kids, but there's that knowing look that Michael Caine has at the very end of the film when he's outside greeting his kids. He just kind of goes like, and just sort of walks off camera. Oh, that's good.
It's great. And
that's really good.
Not to spoil things, Michael Caine claims that Chris Nolan told him, if you're in the film, you're in reality. Chris could have just told Michael Caine that, you know, darkness into that, everything, but Michael Caine said that a couple of years ago, and people obviously took it one way. Some refused to believe it, but I don't really think that's too much of a discussion piece. But that final Inception theory, that to me trumped everything. That 180'd everything I'd ever thought about the film, because it did reach a point where he learnt to let his wife go. He says we did grow old together. Again, great scene that they then show the old scenes from previously where, you know, they've got obviously older actors, they've got wrinkled hands when they're lying down, and it's a really neat little moment. And again, it's in the waiting for a train sequence. But the Michael Caine theory had blew my mind completely.
It's blew my mind almost as
now you'll be able to watch it again.
I know, yeah. I mean, I think it's comparable probably to when you told me that the little kid from Batman Begins, which I didn't mention in our Batman Begins review, was Joffrey. That's up there with that level of mind blowing. But the only other theory that I can think of, and this is no way going to like compare to yours, this is not in terms of the ending, this is more the film in general. This might be a bit reaching. It seems a sort of bit film theory, essay, dissertation kind of thing. But the whole film, the concept of the film is an allegory for like filmmaking and the process of filmmaking. I've seen that one thrown out there in that the dream, the vision that you want, the idea that you want to plant in people's heads is like the final film that you want to make. The whole scene that probably comes close to it is the ideas generation scene where they've got the notepad and they're all sat round in a circle. You've got the researcher, which is like the producer kind of role. You've got Cobb, who's like the director. And they all have roles, essentially. They all have roles assigned. And then I know there was a theory out there. I don't remember who wrote it, but he was saying that when we go and see a film, we are almost sort of, it's a bit up its own arse, the theory, but we are almost sort of like collectively dreaming. We are all in that place experiencing the same thing, escaping to a different world kind of thing for an X amount of time. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting theory. I mean, with Nolan being like one of the most prolific directors, it's nice that there is that kind of, people could view it as an allegory or like a subtext for filmmaking and the whole composition of a film and everything like that. I think it's a bit out there. I think there are concepts that you can draw from, but I don't know if that crossed Christopher Nolan's mind at all when he was making it.
I've never had that. I quite like that's quite interesting. It's a bit far-fetched. It's a film student one, isn't it?
It's all on Wikipedia. People can read about that theory on there. But
what I want to end with is my favourite scene of the film. 528491. The song in the soundtrack, the vault doors open, and I didn't actually cry on Wednesday. I tend to actually get quite tearful with this. The moment in which Cillian Murphy is reunited, I'm getting misty-eyed now. The moment Cillian Murphy reunites with his dad, and it's the disappointed you tried bit, and it's the Hans Zimmer score that kicks in. It's going.
I love how Cillian Murphy plays that as well. When he sees the little windmill and he kind of is lost for words almost. It's beautifully played how he does it, and that's what's great because it shows a will. It shows a will above it, and it's the draw underneath. And what I love last minute about it is Tom Hardy takes that photo off his wallet in level 1, and it's the photo of the windmill. And obviously he then, because that's his level, he plans up Ariadne. He obviously chooses to have that put in there. That was going to be the crux that brings him in. And it's the moment where obviously he starts crying. He looks up and obviously the bell was going like his dad's passed away.
but it's the I'm disappointed you've tried. And it's the music, it's everything. I don't know why it always gets me. I'm literally holding it back now.
And it's sad as well, because in reality, you know that he was actually disappointed in his son.
That's the thing, man. That's what gets me with this film. The reality was the dad died being disappointed in his son. He had no time for the son. He wanted to pass on power to Donald Trump. And the whole film is you're giving this character this belief that his dad, it's noble, it's nice, I get it, but it's a lie. Like, they've tainted the truth, you know. And that's what's always stuck with me, always resonated with me, that the whole point of it was telling this person that his dad wasn't disappointed in him, and the reality was he is.
He actually was.
But it's the fact that I can be 180 switch to think that, you know, if Cillian Murphy was this horrible character you hated, then the story would be, we'll change the idea from his dad being disappointed he tries to his dad being disappointed in him. But because you align with Cillian Murphy, and he's not an antagonist in this, but he is the plot. He is this needs to work on him, and that's the thing that's always stuck with me in this film, is that it wasn't on good merits. They had to change a line. It's the emotion, it's the music, both performances. Cillian Murphy plays it so well. People say he's in 2 scenes, but you get enough, and it's horrible when you get sort of like bedridden scenes like that.
Yeah.
Especially obviously in real life, he was ill at the time, but the Cillian Murphy playoff of that is, I really think he is one of the best working actors today. He picks his projects wisely. He's obviously on an incredible streak of Peaky Blinders. But the fact you mentioned Dunkirk, I can't wait to talk that with you, because he's so good in that film. And I don't know if it's his blue eyes that he can
his
command
big
the scene.
blue eyes.
Yeah, like he can command a scene, and the bed scene is my favorite. And whenever I'm listening to the soundtrack and that song comes on, you know, within the first 3 seconds as well.
It's one of those that you can time all the moments of the movie to, and the lines and the moments and everything. And it's
Tom Hardy does the little smile as well, because he knows it's worked, and then hits its way button. But I think to me that's my favorite scene, which is incredible, because it's probably the least dramatic in terms of scope and you know, sets and everything. It's just the emotional crux of the film that needs to work, and it does, and that always gets me. Which was why I was surprised it didn't get me on Wednesday. I was kind of actually disappointed that I didn't cry for once, which is really
it was the Interstellar one that got you more. A film that I mean, I don't know out of the two which one you've seen the most amount of times, but
Inception. We'll get into that Interstellar review.
Okay.
I can't wait to talk about that, because that was unparalleled what happened recently. And if you're watching this only a couple more days, and you'll find out. Trust me. A week from today.
I think I'd be hard pushed to think of a better scene than that after we just talked about that. That probably is my favorite. Other than the actual ending montage of time, that probably is my favorite as well. So, final thoughts. Well, we were almost banged on the prediction, an hour and a half review, we thought it was. Final thoughts on Inception, still completely holds up. I mean, it's 10 years. It's not that old. Is it? Tell me it's not old, George, so I don't feel like an OAP. But it's fantastic. I think that it's going to be so difficult ranking all these Nolan movies once they're all said and done. We will have a video on that, and it's going to be agonizing to cut these down and to chop and change the list. Right now, just off the top of my head, this is probably my favorite Christopher Nolan film. This is probably at the number 1 spot. It was my number 1 of the 2010s, and I stand by that. Watching it again, 10 years later, as we mentioned, we're still thinking of different theories for it. We're still mulling it over. We're deconstructing it. And that's the sign of a good movie, one that can spark an hour and a half conversation. And I'll be watching this film many more times. And chances are in probably another 10 years, I'll be working other things out about it and mulling it over. There's not really many negatives I can think about. There's probably one sort of on the nose line in the film, which I thought could do without. It's when Mol says about the faceless organizations in the real world, exactly like the ones in the dream. I'm like, I got it. It's a bit literal, but that's literally the one line. This is a flawless film, from writing to concept to staging, acting, everything. It all comes together in a nice, neat little Christopher Nolan bow with Inception. It's fantastic.
I can't add too much to that. It's to me a perfect film. It's the kind of film you want. You want the discourse. We'll be talking about this for the next 10 years. We've already had 10 years of it. It doesn't shy from the memory. There's a chance for people at home, if you've not seen it at the cinema, if you've not seen it on Imax, do go. It's playing until the 26th in England, and in America, I believe it opens on the 21st of August. It's worth going back to a cinema to see. If you haven't seen it, then please do. I can't fault this. The influence this has had, not even influence on cinema itself, because I don't think films can be influenced by this. Filmmakers certainly can, but you can't have an Inception 2. There's not been an Inception 2. There's not been an awful rip-off of Inception that's come down the line, because only one person on this planet is responsible for this. Only one person could have made this, did make this, make it flawless, hire a perfect ensemble cast, hire an exceptional composer, a dynamic relationship with everyone they worked with. This is the Christopher Nolan experience, probably at its absolute highest. I'm not going to rank mine yet, but there is a solid 1 and 2 that can switch on any given day, dependent on what way I want to do a ranking list. And this is the second of the 2, but the other one was reviewed on Thursday, The Dark Knight. So I'm going to be terrified to rank them when we do. I'm probably going to have this, when they draw the mazes on Inception on the walls, that's probably going to be me trying to rank them at this point, because I honestly can't pick. I think emotionally it attached me to a plot which I didn't think it would, and it blew me away with filmmaking techniques which I haven't seen reproduced since then. So nothing more I can say on this exceptional film. But what I can move on to is what we're going on to next. And I'll bring up the schedule one last time. Dark Knight Rises.
Talk about a 180, Jesus.
Dark Knight Rises this Monday, the 17th of August. And obviously, for those of you guys who've spoken very quickly about Interstellar, that's going to be next Saturday, the 22nd. But in between now and then, we have the Christopher Nolan Film Quiz, which we will hype up in the week, I think. If you haven't already followed us on social media to find out more about them, then check us out. We are on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, and the same on Instagram at Cinema_Savvy. If you haven't noticed it already, Chris is wearing our Cinema Savvy t-shirt today. You can get it on TeePublic at the link in the description. And we also have a Cinema Savvy Syncopy logo, which Chris will point to, as he very often does.
I've got it down now. There we go.
So if you are interested, do check them out. They're pretty neat t-shirts. And obviously, for those of you guys watching that are watching live and missed it, obviously live or on Premiere, but do comment below your thoughts on Inception. If you have liked this review, check out some of our older Nolan ones. If you haven't already subscribed to us, please do. You'll get notifications of the next couple of videos. And we don't just do Christopher Nolan videos. We are this August, but there are other things we do. Many reviews, discussions, quizzes, and Battle of the Brackets. So be sure to like, comment as well, and do share this to your friends. If you want to put your Inception theories in the comments below, please do. We will reply to them. We'll probably send them to each other, because the more you read about a film like this, the funner it gets. And that is everything I can say. So we will be back this Monday the 17th.
You guys know you've been waiting for this one. You've been waiting for this one since we started the damn channel, and we're finally going to get it done. We finally got to talk about Inception today, and we're going to knock the other one off on Monday. We're going to be talking about The Dark Knight Rises. And I've got a lot of opinions, and it's going to be... The thumbnail should be something like this, like me and you just fisticuffs over it. It's going to be the one to watch. It's going to be hilarious talking about it, and yeah, that's the one that we... Out of the 2 movies, it's probably The Last Jedi and The Dark Knight Rises, certainly the top 2 that me and you disagree on. And it's going to be fun having that discussion, having that debate. So don't miss that one. This has been a really fun one to talk about. Obviously, we're not live at the moment, but for you guys watching, if you're still watching, thank you very much. And we'll see you on Monday.